Hello, and welcome to Real Person Reviews. I'm Sam, and I'm a real person. And today I want to talk to you about Castlevania, Circle of the Moon. This is the first in the trilogy of Castlevania games for the Game Boy Advance. And that's not counting the classic NES port of the first Castlevania, because that's a port of an NES game. And it's not original to the Game Boy Advance, that's why I'm not counting it. It's not any different. Alright. So, this game, I don't know where it fits in the overall chronology of the stories, the timelines of the Castlevania series, and I don't really give a shit. You can look that up if you really care. The story's pretty simple. I'll try to go through it fast, even though I'm bad at explaining these, and typically don't care. It's very short and simple. Basically, the game starts off with Dracula being resurrected, but he's not at full power yet, so it's not super bad, I guess. However, he is immediately found by a vampire hunter and his two student vampire hunters. One of which is actually his son. And basically, Dracula separates them, creates a hole in the floor, and blows a hole right in that floor. The two students fall down, and of course they immediately want to go back and save their master, or teacher, or whatever the fuck. And the one who is his son seems to be pretty anxious to prove himself, and tells the other to just stay back because he would get in the way, and goes and tries to save his father. And then the game starts. You are the other student, and that means you have to learn a bunch of shit. That's basically the story. And if you look into it a little deeper, I guess there are a couple other parts, and I don't guess I'm not gonna spoil it for you. Okay, so just I'll let you figure out the rest of it as you play. Doesn't really matter, not a huge deal, but I don't want to spoil it too much. That's just how it starts off. Simple plot, just kind of goes from there. Alright, and the style is, well, it's that Metroidvania kind of style. With the 2D platforming action that you expect from Castlevania games, mixed in with some Metroid-like exploration. Much like Symphony of the Night, which was the Castlevania on the PlayStation 1. And you can tell it borrows a lot from there, obviously, as that was a very successful game and a great formula. So it's mostly like that. I guess if you've played that, you understand. Basically, you're just in one big castle, and to traverse it, you need to do a number of things. Basically, you go around and kill enemies with your whip, like you would in most Castlevania games, right? And killing them gets you experience points. Getting more experience points will help you level up. When you level up, your stats will go up. And, I mean, that's pretty simple stuff. You can get new abilities by fighting certain items in the castle, generally after defeating bosses. And these abilities allow you to reach other parts of the castle that you couldn't before. You can use sub-weapons, which are like a lot of classic ones, you know. The knife, the boomerang, the axe. If you're used to other Castlevania games, you'll understand them. But basically, you can just use those as throwing items that will help you hit enemies that are otherwise difficult for you to hit with just your whip, since your whip is rather slow. And it only whips, you know, straight. You can, I mean, there's health, of course, also. Enemies will drop armor, is one of the things they drop, so you can equip yourself with different kinds of armor to help, you know, change your stats up. They might drop refillable things, like getting you extra hearts, extra health, cure your status ailments, or, there's also a way to recover your magic, and then there's also magic in this as well. And to use magic, you access that with this interesting thing in here called the Dual Setup System, or DSS for short, as it says in the game. The Dual Setup System basically, it's there's 2 rows of cards, and you collect these cards from enemies that have died, and okay, so the top row are action cards, and that just kind of dictates what the spell generally does. So like some of them, there's one that like changes the element of your whip. There's one that creates a shield around you. There's one that buffs your stats. And the bottom row, which are attribute cards, dictate, those are how these general things are changed slightly, the variations of it. So like, if you have the one that changes your whip, there's like fire, there's an ice, there's a lightning one. If you have a shield, it's a fire shield, ice shield, lightning, buffing different individual stats, have to like attack or defense, things like that. So it's pretty interesting. There's some other like cool like uses for it too. It can be used to help you do exploration in some parts. It can make a lot of enemies and areas much easier to cope with. And with all the different combinations and things that they do, little perks they give you, they're really good for strategizing. And it's really awesome that they give you this kind of ability to not just have to focus on either being super good and not getting hit by anybody when you're walking around in the castle in hard parts. You have more options. You can try to get really good and just avoid everything. That's always an option. If that's too hard for you and doesn't seem very possible, you can always grind for a long time until your stats are high enough. Or there's this method, which allows you to give yourself certain advantages over some enemies, and it makes it just easy, and for bosses as well. It makes it really easy for you to like do more than just like, okay, either get super good or just mindlessly grind. And it's a nice little middleman there. It makes you think a bit. I like the strategizing. That's cool. So there's that. And using those uses your MP. So that's the thing to think about. And that's really, most of the basics of the game is just that, going around fighting enemies and bosses and exploring, and getting new items and stuff, and eventually trying to trying to defeat Dracula. That's kind of the thing. So that's pretty much all you can expect from the game. And it's really fun, and it's pretty addictive, and it's a decent length game. I think it might take you probably somewhere between 10 and 20 hours. It took me about 20 hours. I'm not great at it. But I have some issues with it. As cool as it is, and I really like the style and all that, but it does have some problems. So among these problems, I guess, one of them is kind of weird. It's not necessarily a problem, but you might not like it. At first I didn't really like it, but I got used to it. There's your control, you're very slow. You control kind of like a Belmont would in other Castlevania games. You're rather slow, you move like you're walking. You only have a whip to whip people, and that's not the fastest thing either, so you have to play very smart and strategically. You can get the ability to run later from an item, but that's a little bit later, and it's kind of goofy to use. You gotta double tap in a direction to use it. Yeah, but that was the kind of a thing where it's an interesting choice to make you control that way, when it wasn't like that in Symphony of the Night. But it kind of reminds me a little bit more of a Super Castlevania 4 in the way you have control over your jumps. There's some weight to your movement, but I think it's still better control than that too. Also, you have this little ability where if you hold down the whip button, you will spin the whip around you in a circular fashion, which hits things very quickly, but it does very little damage, mostly used for getting annoying little enemies away from you or destroying projectiles. It's not really meant to be your main thing of attack. That's a neat little thing they added, I suppose. But the problems kind of come in when you look at well, for one thing, I think it's more of a disappointment for me. Is there's no like money system, or there's no weapons you can get. You always are using the whip, and you will only use the whip. I think there may be a few combinations where you get other weapons with a dual setup system, or you can empower your whip with that, but that's using magic to do it. You never actually get a different weapon. It hardly like changes the way you play, and it's because it uses so much magic. Generally, you won't be using that a lot unless you're trying to focus on your magic stuff. So that was a little disappointing, especially when there was like, you know, a whole like a bunch of different weapons and stuff in Symphony of the Night, and in the third installment, Aria of Sorrow, also on the Game Boy Advance. The third on the Game Boy Advance ones is that one has that stuff. So it's like either they didn't have it figured out yet, or like they didn't want to do it. And I can respect having you use more strategy in this one and being different, but I just didn't like it as much, personally. Another thing is that I think probably the biggest issue I have with this is this focus on grinding, because you almost have to grind in this game. Unless you're super good and like you can avoid getting hit by things and want to keep doing that over and over, you know, you're going to have to grind. They didn't make it so, like, it was, you know, you could get around it, really. And, like, it's fun to walk around and kill things and level up and feel like, you know, come back later and kill enemies that you know, enemies that used to take, like, 2-3 hits. You can just put them down, whip them once, and they're dead. That feels really satisfying. But this game kind of changes that up in that, after you unlock certain areas and get further, then they just kind of in some of the previous areas they will replace the enemies there with tougher ones, so you don't really get that same kind of sense of satisfaction, only in certain places where it doesn't switch them up. So like when you go back there, it's not like you can just breeze through it again. You have to fight harder enemies, and it kind of tries to stay along with you in those parts. But that's also compounded with this idea that about like halfway through, after I was like 50% of the castle explored or something, then after that, every time I would beat a boss and go to a new area, the difficulty would spike. It wasn't like a gradual curve anymore. It was just like it would spike up every time. And I would be getting killed like a lot. And that was really annoying. It was like I had to go back and grind for a long time to be able to survive long enough to actually explore those areas. And then I had to go, and if I was lucky, I could kill the boss. If not, I had to grind more so I could kill the boss. So it was like, get to a new area, grind a bunch before I go there, so I'm able to survive and explore it. And then fight the boss, and if I'm lucky, I can beat the boss without having to go back and grind up again. You can switch it up with, you know, maybe put a bunch of stuff in your defense, and try to risk, with like your dual setup system and your armor and stuff, your equipment. You can put it all in defense and try to, just survive. It'll take more hits to kill enemies, but if you do happen to get hit, then it does less damage. Or put it all in attack, and then it's less hits to kill enemies, but you risk taking even more damage. There's stuff like that, trade-offs you have to consider. And you think, there's also that system I talked about. Like, it's cool, you can just use those cards and use certain combinations to get through those areas. Yeah, you can, but the thing is you have to have the appropriate cards that are going to help you in those situations. And, to get those you have to, kill enemies. Enemies drop those cards. So, how do you know what enemy has what card, and what card you're going to need to get what combination, or even what the combinations do? You don't. You have to go around and grind on a bunch of enemies, kill a bunch of them, until you happen to get a card out of them, if they happen to drop them, and they're rare. It's not like these things drop a lot, which is why you really want to focus on that luck stat, I suppose, but it can take a long time, because the more you put your focus on the luck stat, then the harder, it takes more hits. To kill them, you can get hurt easier. It's just a lot of it is like, it comes down to like, you have to grind unless you can play through this game perfectly, which most people aren't going to be able to do, and they're not going to want to bother to put all that time in when they can just level up instead. It's also, and like, if they can't get it skillfully done, like, leveling up is going to be a better use of that time, because they won't keep losing all that progress from dying trying to get through there, without the grinding. And the card things suck because, you don't know what the combinations do. This is another problem, okay? They don't really explain this card system to you, the dual setup system. And I wish that they would. You can get little descriptions of the cards when you find them that sort of give you an idea of what they'll do. But the thing is, you don't know what any of the combinations do. They don't tell you right off the bat. So you have to go in and select them. It doesn't even tell you a little tutorial on how to use it either. You just have to kind of figure it out. Which I did, I guess, for the most part. but they don't tell you what they do until you use them. Okay, I guess that's alright too, I suppose. So, like, you know, using the thing with the whip, like, you turn it on, you whip once, and you're like, okay, it does like this, it looks like that. You go in, you can look at the screen again, and it'll say the description because you've used it. Ones that buff the stats, of course, it just automatically buffs your stats. So once you turn it on and then look in the menu, it'll say what it did because it was doing it. But there's some where, like, you have to get hit for it to happen. Like, I know there's one specifically where it was like you get, your damages, like, or it's not your damage reduced even, it's just that your invulnerability time after being hit was like increased, like it was like 4 times the length or whatever. And that was one where I was like, I wouldn't have figured that out unless, you know, I put it on and got hit. And I did. It happened, and I guess that's something you could happen to do, but it's not something you would necessarily do and strive for. And that's kind of sucky. And what's worse is that there's some, and there's like multiple of this, where you have to put in a button combination. And nowhere does this fucking tell you to do this button combination. Maybe it says it in the booklet, maybe, because I don't have the booklet, it's got the game. But, like, maybe it should tell you, you know, in the fucking game, if you have to put in a button combination, that's not something you would naturally do with one of those spells selected. I mean, you would have to have that spell activated by hitting that button so it's, like, on. And then you would have to put in whichever way you're facing, which is left or right, you hit that direction, then hit down, and then hit up and B at the same time. Up and B is how you use your sub-weapon, so if you did it incorrectly, you would just throw your sub-weapon. So really, it's like, even if you did that combination of things by accident, that's not even necessarily going to do this summon. And that's if you already have that spell still active. So that's just ridiculous that they didn't, like, explain that at all. And the only reason I knew that is because I looked it up. I was looking up some stuff to help make the game a little easier near the end game, and all of a sudden I figured out, oh, holy shit, you can, like, do combinations of things with that, and the game doesn't tell you. So that's kind of bullshit. I don't like that. But I do still like this game. I like that it is a little more challenging. Oh, and one other thing that I forgot to mention. There are different modes which are supposed to kind of be there for replay value. I think there's like 4 modes. To unlock these modes, you have to beat the game. So, like, you beat the game on normal, which is as a vampire killer, which is what the class is called, I guess. Basically, you have well-rounded stats. And it's the normal way you play the game. So, you know, you're going to have that the first time around. After that, it says that you can put in the password Fireball. And that allows you to play as the Magician, which would basically just give you lower stats and everything, except for your intelligence would be high. And that's a pretty rough one to go into. It sounds really hard from what I've looked at and experienced and read, you know. It was hard. Strangely hard as a reward for the second playthrough. And there are, you know, 3 others, but in order to get them, you have to beat each one in order. So, like, you have to beat Magician to get the next one, and then beat that one to get the next one, and that's how you do them. Why not just unlock all of them when you beat the game, so you can, like, choose what you want to do? That would be cool for replay value. Why do you have to do them all in order? And why put the super hard one as the second one? I mean, yeah, maybe you want more of a challenge, but then, like, after that is one that's, like, considerably easier. They're more like different play styles, I guess, and I can see where they're coming from, but it's not a different story at all. Nothing changes except for your stats. And, that's kind of bullshit. That's, like, not very good way to extend the gameplay. So I guess I just wasn't really happy with that either. And it didn't make me want to play it again right away. Maybe some other time. Alright, so Castlevania, Circle of the Moon. It's alright. You know, it's fun. If you're into the Metroidvania kind of stuff, go for it. You know, I would say if you haven't really played any of the other Game Boy Advance ones, start with this one, because going back to it after playing the other ones first, I played Aria of Sorrow first, going back to this one feels a little bit primitive, and I would say, like, you know, I mean, you can see I got this for $12, and it was worth that. I would say, you know, maybe, I don't know, you can maybe go $15 on this one. I wouldn't go too much higher. Maybe 20 if you're really into Metroidvania stuff, but it's a decent price, and I really wanted to check it out anyway. So yeah, I would say, go for it, but the others are probably a higher priority on those. They're better, and if you have those, you don't necessarily need to bother with this one. If you want to know more about those other ones and kind of how this fares with them, then stay tuned for my next reviews. I'm going to be reviewing both of those as well, so there's that to look forward to. Actually, I may have already reviewed Aria of Sorrow. I don't remember because I did review it, and then I took down a lot of my reviews. I don't know if I did a real person review on that yet or not, but if I didn't, you're going to see it all in a row, baby. So look forward to those two. And the next one is going to be the one that came out right after this for the Game Boy Advance, which is Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. So stay tuned for that one. And how, what do you like about this game? You'll leave that in the comments if you want to say anything about it, your favorite DSS setup. If you've ever played this, I don't know many people, I haven't heard it talked about a whole lot. What you thought of it, your thoughts on this, and just share your stuff, guys. Anything else you want to see me review, suggest it. If I have it, I'll try to get to it and stuff and do that. It'll be fun. We'll have fun. Alright, so, that's it for Castlevania Circle of the Moon, and, bye.